the universe may have just changed a bit. You might not be able to tell by looking at it. And to be clear, no, I'm not talking about the recent super pink moon, even though that was quite beautiful, but our place in the universe, how we see ourselves in the universe, how we live in the universe may have just changed quite a lot. You probably didn't notice it because things are hectic right now, and you also probably didn't notice it because the change begins in what amounts to only a few words, a statement of new national policy. Outer space is a legally and physically unique domain of human activity, and the United States does not view it as a global commons. And out of this statement, well, the change has only really just begun. Just the other day, I got a text from a friend. It was a link to a news article with the headline, "Trump Order Encourages U.S. to Mine the Moon." It was an article about an executive order just issued by President Donald J. Trump on April 6, 2020, just a few days ago as of this recording. The order that contains that key sentence that I just read a few moments ago. To be honest, I'm surprised that I hadn't heard about it sooner. You see, this friend sent it to me because they know me pretty well. Well enough to know that that headline would be my absolute worst nightmare. And why would moon mining be my worst nightmare rather than something more reasonable like this weird cat? Kinda cute though. Well, it's because for over a year, I have spent my time researching both the science fiction and the real-world law of outer space exploration, or space law. I have lived, breathed, consumed, and quite literally cried over this stuff. All the greatest hits, from 1867's From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne to, and this one is a real page-turner, trust me, 2015's Public Law 11490, the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, in its multiple drafts. Overall, there's one thing that I've learned about outer space during my research. It is that anything having to do with outer space automatically sounds really cool, which is fun, but also kind of a problem when you want to see it clearly. There's so much genuine enthusiasm and astronaut ice cream, that delicious freeze-dried Neapolitan styrofoam miracle, that it keeps us from really asking harder questions about why we go to space in the first place. Take, for instance, the headline of the article my friend sent. Trump order encourages U.S. to mine the moon. Moon mining? That means we get moon rocks, which is, I'll admit it, an amazing feat. And you might think, it has to be great, there's no downsides, right? Moon rocks! Except, who exactly is the we that gets those resources? For the most part, scientists, the international scientific community. Okay, that's been a good thing going for some 50-odd years now, but what if that changes? Well, it is. It's changing now, it just has. As of 3 days ago, I'm rather concerned that space law may have changed an awful lot, and may be about to change more. At minimum, there is a dangerous precedent that has been set for the whole international community. You see, my research into outer space law and science fiction first emerged from the hunch that outer space captivates and dwells in the imagination. That a lot of the ways in which people, policymakers, scientists, writers, billionaires approach outer space and its use depends upon the ideas that dwell in their imaginations. It's not just pure science or an unquestionable spirit of discovery. It's not just rocket science. It's fiction. It's politics. It's economics, baby. The growth of space exploration depends on an ambient understanding of what exists around us, what has existed, and what might exist, and not just the phenomenology of gas giants and black holes and nebulae, a basic understanding of history. Some of us, not all of us, it's not universal, and that's important to note, but some of us do strive to go to the stars. The United States, Soviet Russia, modern Russia, cosmonauts and astronauts and teachers and tourists. With those prospective passengers come different visions of what a future in space can hold, can promise, often extrapolated from how well we know our past. On the moon, left behind after the Apollo lunar landings, there is a plaque that reads, "We came in peace for all mankind." There is hope to this statement. There is optimism. There is a stated ideology of a universal humanistic intention, whether it's true or not. If, like me, you grew up loving science fiction and consuming stories like Star Trek, you know that we can have social ambitions fused with our visions of outer space exploration. To seek out new life and new civilizations. To boldly go towards something like a better world. The end of poverty, the end of want, the end of war, and, as it happens, the end of money and the end of nations. I mean, through space, we dream of possibilities. Or through space, we can have none of them. Or rather, not all possibilities are a manifestation of hope. Instead, we can end up with the ideology that is winning the debate right now, a nationalist vision that is the betrayal of what we act like space exploration is supposed to be about. In peace for all mankind no longer, if it ever was true in the first place. Trump's most recent executive order demonstrates both the tremendous lack of imagination and adherence to greed. And it demonstrates that we are on a path to growing inequality, which might seem obvious. But this is a proposal of inequality on interplanetary scales. To understand that fully, to see how devastating that is, we have to first go a little bit further back in the history of space law, particular to a point in time where two visions of space exploration, optimistic and opportunistic, diverged. In 1970, Dr. Aldo Armando Coca, a legal scholar and representative of Argentina with the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or COPUOS, C-O-P-U-O-S, proposed the first draft for what would eventually become, in 1979, the agreement governing the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies, or the Moon Treaty for short. This agreement was ambitious and was attempting to resolve unanswered questions concerning the legal nature of property in outer space. Questions that had been left unanswered by the United Nations earlier Outer Space Treaty of 1967, or the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of Space and the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. Just give me just a sec. They really like long titles of the UN. Very specific. I admire it. The UN's Outer Space Treaty is the most fundamental document in space law written so far. In Article 1, it asserts that the exploration and use of outer space is to be for the benefit and in the interest of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic and scientific development, and shall be the province of all mankind. The province of all mankind. In other words, by some interpretations, outer space belongs to humanity, to everyone, with an equal and overlapping claim. There is to be no privileging of certain countries based on their relative wealth or resources in that claim. Article 2 furthers this with the assertion that there would be no grounds for national appropriation by claims of sovereignty. There can be no borders in space, no national claims. The Moon Treaty of 1979, in turn, took this a step further. In it, the celestial bodies of outer space, the land, were now to be treated as the common heritage of mankind. Heritage. In other words, outer space is already the inheritance, the property of the whole species, fully complicating the access to and use of property in space. This would reinforce and identify the land in outer space, the objects that we can actually land on, as a global commons. Land that no one can individually own, but that people can share. For comparison, there are 3 other global commons that have been established by international law: Antarctica, the high seas, and the atmosphere. Shared spaces that no one person can take possession of, that are to be places of peace. And with the ascription of global commons often comes an expectation of reasonable international regulation. The high seas, for instance, owned by no one, used by many, is governed by international, though not always perfectly enforced, regulations to avoid environmental damage or overfishing. Real problems where the excessive stripping and exploitation of the resources found in that global commons could result in the benefit of a few, but a proportional loss for many, without the pre-existing resources to compete. Local fissures versus super mega fissure conglomerations. Who do you think would win in that scenario? The 1979 Moon Treaty wanted to avoid exactly this kind of problem in outer space. Article 11 continues with the establishment of an international regime overseeing the collection of outer space resources intended to ensure, among other regulatory roles, an equitable sharing by all states parties in the benefits derived from those resources, whereby the interests and needs of the developing countries, as well as the efforts of those countries which have contributed either directly or indirectly to the exploration of the moon, shall be given special consideration. To be clear, this didn't mean communism, equitable distribution, not equal redistribution, but it just means that space would not be a place for haphazard greed. It is a direct effort to prevent outer space from becoming a territory that benefits only the powerful entities with sufficient pre-existing means to access it. Article 11 further expands its definition of implicated states to include any international, intergovernmental, or non-governmental organization, national organization, or non-governmental entity, or any natural person. Not just nations. This would include entities like corporations and private individuals. My mom does not own a star, no matter what website she buys it from, and what it says on the certificate.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
Nothing, Mom. Don't worry.
Are you trying to advocate for the international regulation of outer space resources again?
No, I wouldn't dream of something like that, Mom. You know me. Capitalism in space. Woo-hoo.
You better not interfere with my claims on Betelgeuse.
I wouldn't dream of it. Anyways, you'd think that by now, with the Moon Treaty's spirit of sharing and cooperation going all the way back to 1979, that we'd be well on our way to building a United Federation of Planets, or a Death Star. Well, maybe not a Death Star. But sadly, either way, you'd be wrong. Because the Moon Treaty effectively failed. The United States would not sign it, in no small part because of the influence of lobbyists who saw what they might reap from an unregulated outer space. For what it's worth, the Soviet Union wouldn't sign it either, mostly because they did not want to bring any legal concept of property into outer space. But in the end, the only nations that signed it, a few more than a dozen, were largely the nations that don't have any kind of space program at all. The fishers whose boats were sunk before they even made it out into the water. But the super, mega, fisher conglomerations, they wanted that ocean of stars. I want you to know about the Moon Treaty of 1979. I want you to know that an attempt was made to shape outer space into a region for true international cooperation, for sustained equality, or something at least a little like it. There was a path that may have led to a more optimistic and inclusive imagining of outer space exploration, and the United States, and most of the world, turned away from it. And so, for 41 years, this dilemma would remain a moot point. Increasingly, space programs shifted their focus away from colonization and mining and interplanetary travel, projecting those eventualities further and further away in time. There was no great pressure to resolve the open question of property in space, because the technology didn't really make it feasible yet. It would remain an open question until then. Until recently. Trump's executive order chooses a different path than that of the Moon Treaty. In Section 1, there is that sentence, "Outer space is a legally and physically unique domain of human activity, and the United States does not view it as a global commons." Section 2 of the executive order directly denies any obligations that the Moon Treaty might impose upon the United States, denying it any place in the canon of customary international law. Instead, the United States will now seek to pursue the public and private recovery and use of space resources. At its conceivable worst, there very well may be a new kind of space race about to begin in the years to come. A race more like the gold rush in its frenzy to acquire. And to be clear, this is not just Trump's vision. He's not singularly to blame. It's been growing for a while. In fiction, there has been a finger on the pulse of this more opportunistic pathway. Avatar, Alien, take your pick of space film where wealth and property are the motivating factors for exploration. Likewise, Trump's executive order makes mention of a law that was successfully passed through Congress, through the Senate, across President Barack Obama's desk back in 2015. I mentioned it earlier. Public Law 11490, the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. Title IV of the Act states that a United States citizen engaged in commercial recovery of an asteroid resource or space resource under this chapter shall be entitled to any asteroid resource or space resource obtained, including to possess, own, transport, use, and sell the asteroid resource or space resource obtained in accordance with applicable law, including the international obligations of the United States. Without this piece of law, even with its reference to international obligations, without this precedent, I am not certain that we would be confronted by Trump's executive order now. The executive order is just a fulfillment of something that I have traced growing in American policy for the last few decades, and that others have traced too. This barely scratches the surface of my research. It is the last decade of space law that has especially pushed the dream of equality a little bit further away, year by year. And with this executive order, like the light of an ancient star, we may be seeing the last glimmers of something that is scarce, hope for an equal future. This is happening now. Right now, if we are not careful, space will only become for a limited few, for a few nations, for the wealthy with the means to acquire the wealth of planets. And what upsets and infuriates me most about all of this is a single question. Why did this executive order come now, of all times? Why during this time of crisis, as a pandemic is essentially permitted to take the lives of thousands? Why look to the stars at a time when our problem is not an utter lack of resources, but a lack of empathy and a sufficient apparatus to share them equitably, as well as a lack of preparedness? We live in a country of abundance that hoards it away and misuses it, whether it's money or sufficient medical care. We already live on a planet filled with life that is dying by the day. I fear what that irresponsible grasp, that greed, that ravenous appetite will do out there. But I fear more for those of us who will be left behind, who will not be permitted to reap the benefits of something that once, in the legal imagination, was supposed to be ours, everyone's. I don't know how to fight this, not yet. I know that I can't do it alone. I think that we have to fight this greed here, greed out there. And when I say we, I mean we with as full a definition as I can understand and intend. Outer space, which is to say how we use it, is a political issue, but it's also a human issue, a human threshold. Outer space is cool, it's so cool, and it's beautiful, but we cannot afford to go out there at the cost of what we already have here. That cost is too high, and I do not just mean money, but the cost of a sense of moral responsibility to each other. Right now, we are on a path to paying it, and make no mistake, we will be the ones to pay for it. Regular people and the people of largely exploited and impoverished nations, less fortunate or less armed than the United States. I think that we should stand against conquest, wherever it is, and this is unjust conquest. This is not even America first, this is greed first. It is a turning away from a kinder way of valuing human life, from looking at ourselves as a small part of a big universe, a space where there is space for all. Know the 1979 Moon Treaty, if only that from this. Don't let it be forgotten. Let it be known that the future that we are moving towards is not the only possibility. An executive order can do something to change our place in the universe. Yes, it can cause real harm, but there is still so many ways for us to live and survive and share and love and take care of each other in this wonderful cosmos. Remember what might have been. Dream of what might be. Do what you do best, humans. Use your voice, use your minds, use your imaginations. I hope to use mine to protect that which is truly the common heritage of us all. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go. Anyways,